Ukraine has branded the vote as a farce and ramped up its aerial bombardment of Russian regions just across their shared border ahead of the polls. For more analysis on what to watch out for in this presidential election, joining us now is from Washington, D.C., Benton Coblentz, Program Assistant, Eurasia Center Atlantic Council. Thank you very much for joining us. Benton, first of all, it looks like Mr. Putin is all but certain to win. So why does the election matter? I mean, what's the purpose of the election for Mr. Putin?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and good morning to all of you in Singapore. This is, at first look, not an important election because we already know what the result is going to be. We know that Vladimir Putin is going to secure yet another term in office. We know that he's going to serve another 6 years as president of the Russian Federation. But under the surface, there's a lot going on, both domestically within the Russian Federation, as well as, in terms of Putin's global strategy. So first off, this election is a legitimizing, process for the Russian people. And what it serves to do is to disrupt and quiet any opposition to Putin's regime and to, his being able to maintain a hold on power. But globally, what's important is that this process of actually holding the election helps to strengthen Putin's hand. He'll be able to go around the world and say that, like his spokesman said just the other day, Dmitry Peskov, that Russia's democracy is perfect, that it's uncriticizable. But of course, those of us who know what Russian democracy is actually like know that it is far from uncriticizable. It's far from perfect. And so Putin will trot out his results. He'll likely win the election in quotation marks with anywhere between 70 and 80% of the vote. According to what the Central Election Commission will say are the official return statistics. And Putin will say that he has a strong hand and he has a strong mandate to continue his war on Ukraine and to continue his aggressive foreign policy across the globe.
Benton,
that's what's at stake here.
I hear you, Benton. Just want to pick up on that particular point with the Russian economy, in a wartime footing now. And I come across reports a lot that say, look, it's all about turnout. It's all about the margin of victory, which are most important. You mentioned 70 to 80%. Is that going to be an actual number, or is that, you think, going to be a manufactured number?
Oh, it's absolutely manufactured. So the Russian state has pulled out all of its powers to ensure that Vladimir Putin gets reelected as president, and it's going to do everything it can to ensure that he receives the number of votes that he wants. There's no doubt about it. And they're going to use a number of different tools. They'll incentivize people to actually come to the polls directly. They'll do that by making it as easily accessible to come to polling stations as possible, set them up in universities, set them up in schools and in local communities. They'll even, host little mini markets or even little mini festivals outside polling stations to encourage people to physically come out to vote. And that's for the optics of the election. But the people who are actually counting the votes, they're going to count them the way that they want to. And that's reinforced by the fact that this is the first Russian presidential election where digital or electronic voting is taking place. That will allow Russian officials whom should not be trusted at all with such a mechanism. That will allow Russian officials to manipulate the figures even more easily than they would have otherwise. Both the turnout statistics as well as the top line results for Vladimir Putin and his opponents.
Okay, Benton. Of course, Putin's main rival, Alexei Navalny, looming large in the election. It's been, a month since his death, and his widow urged Russians to come out, protest on the election day. Will there be any signs of demonstration?
It's hard to say. Of course, it's dangerous to participate in those kinds of activities in Russia. We saw lots of Navalny's supporters and opponents to the Putin regime come out to honor Navalny during his funeral in Moscow, which was a brave act by many Russians to express their support for the late opposition figure. But we see that the Russian officials and Russian authorities are only increasingly cracking down on dissent. Just recently, Navalny's former chief of staff, who is in Lithuania, was beaten up by attackers that the Lithuanian authorities say were likely organized by Russia, which means organized by Moscow, which means in the end organized by Vladimir Putin. And so that just goes to show that even in exile, opposition politicians and opposition figures aren't safe. Right. And that will certainly not go unnoticed by those ordinary Russians who oppose the regime, who support and want to honor Navalny and other opposition figures, but who very well might be afraid to do what Navalny and his widow, Yulia Navalnaya, have called on them to do.
Right. Benton, voting also taking place in 4 Russian-occupied areas in Ukraine. I mean, we're hearing reports of polling officers actually showing up in homes accompanied by armed men. Obviously, the problems are obvious, but I'm wondering, why does Putin view voting in these territories as so important?
Yeah, so of course, that holding elections in those territories is illegal. It is illegal under international law because those territories do not belong to Russia, according to international law. And that is what Putin and the Russian regime and Russian officials are trying to flout, is international law. And what they're trying to do is establish that these territories belong to Russia and have a record that folks and the residents of these regions participated in the elections. They participated in other Russian government functions. That's why, the handing out of passports, the introduction of the Russian ruble, and other official actions are so important because it's Putin and Moscow trying to establish their sovereignty where they have no right to establish any sovereignty. That is in the legal and de jure territory of Ukraine. And so rightfully so, Ukraine has denounced the holding of elections in those territories, as has the United States and other of Kyiv's international partners, because it absolutely runs in the face of international law and the recognition of territorial sovereignty and integrity of not just Ukraine, but of those principles that underlie the entire international system.
All right, Benton, we do have to leave it there. We thank you very much for your time this morning. We have been speaking to Benton Coblentz, Program Assistant at the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council.